Yeah.
No.
It was Arnold Allen.
Oh, yeah.
And this kind of feels the same, which is unfair because Aljo is the fucking champion and Petr Yan is so obviously an amazing win. As is Corey Sandhagen before him. I mean, the win streak is phenomenal. And yet, there's just this feeling of the last, basically as long as Cejudo's been out, all we've seen from Sterling is like a Petr Yan who appeared to be crippled by his own arrogance as much as anything else, albeit against a very good game plan, and then a TJ Dillashaw who was frankly the
Crippled.
victims, crippled by
Crippled, yes.
Crippled by his crippledness. Hello, ladies, gentlemen, all you other folks out there. Welcome to another edition of Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connor Rebush. With me, as always, is Phil McKenzie.
It's me.
Oh, wow. 2 syllables and all. Wow, that is very exciting. That has me just juiced up, Phil, to talk about UFC 288. Think of all the syllables I'm going to get in reply from you. Wow. It is UFC 288 this week. More specifically, it's Aljamain Sterling versus Henry Cejudo, which, considering that bantamweight is unquestionably the best weight class in MMA and in the UFC, is this like what it feels like the division was building towards? Because it doesn't really, to me. It's a perplexing fight. Obviously, Henry Cejudo has pull, has a continued presence despite having been out for 3 years, almost to the day by the time this fight happens, like 3 days removed from exactly 3 years. But like the guy's been out for 3 years. He hasn't really fought his way into position to get this title shot. There's guys like Corey Sandhagen out there who, like, yes, he lost to Aljamain Sterling, but he has been diligently working his way into challenger position. And Song Yadong just got a great win last weekend. That's another guy who might be in the picture very soon. Instead, we're getting Henry Cejudo. It's a little perplexing. It's a little difficult to know how to feel about it. I don't know. What do you say, Phil?
I mean, it's one of those ones where it really depends what kind of Henry Cejudo turns up. Because I think basically the dynamic is pretty similar to the one with TJ Dillashaw with a few caveats.
Mm-hmm.
Is that, like, this guy is an undeniable all-time great. He poses several stylistic problems for the champion.
Mm-hmm.
The question is simply, like, how complete is he going to be after basically 3 years away, and with his one fight, his last fight essentially being itself off a 1 year layoff and being against Dominic Cruz, who is, not in his prime, let's say.
Yeah.
It has been a long time since we've seen Henry Cejudo against an elite opponent.
Yeah.
But that being said, I still think it's a genuinely fascinating fight. I mean, it's another one of those ones like Simone against Yadong, where I'm just like, I don't really know what's going to happen here.
Yeah.
Both fighters have significant asterisks over a lot of their wins. And I just cannot think of I don't have a strong image of how it's going to end up looking.
Yeah. Neither do I. All right. Well, that'll do it for segment 1. When we come back. No, I will tell you what we're going to talk about later, just before we dive headlong into this fight. We've also got in the co-main event, Bilal Muhammad versus Gilbert Burns. Jessica Andrade is trying to prove that she is not fully figured out and finished developing against Yan Xiaonan. We were supposed to have Movsar Evloev versus Bryce Mitchell. Unfortunately, that fight has been scrapped, so Hopefully Movsar does something impressive to the beautifully tattooed man that he is fighting instead, and we can talk about it next week. There's also Kron Gracie versus Charles Jourdain, opening up the main card. There's a couple highlights on the prelims as well. And of course, last week we had Song Simone. We are definitely going to talk about that. I found that to be a very interesting 5-round main event. But yeah, back to what we were saying about those asterisks. I mean, what are the sort of the limiting factors preventing us from feeling like we know exactly what to expect here? Henry Cejudo, his last 2 wins, one over an old Dominic Cruz. A win, as you were saying before we started, it's still, aged pretty well regardless. I don't think Dominic Cruz, even what is clearly a shot Dominic Cruz, like he's shot in the way that all-time greats get shot. He's still going out there and making a good account of himself, even in his worst losses. And by that metric, Cejudo's win might be the best of all of the recent wins people have gotten over Cruz. Because he just thrashed him.
And no one has done that to Dominic Cruz before or since.
Right. And then before that, unless I'm mistaken, was the fight with Dillashaw. It was
Moraes.
It was the Moraes fight, which I don't know if it's fair to call that an asterisk. I think, if anything, that was the fight that basically ended Marlon Moraes' career as an elite fighter. But up to that point, maybe it hasn't aged well, but I think you can really point the finger at Cejudo for that, for that rapid aging process that Moraes went through. And then before that was the Dillashaw fight. Dillashaw, basically his last 2 title fights coming in horribly compromised physical condition and being allowed to fight on for one reason or the other. The other of those title fights, of course, being one of Aljamain Sterling's asterisks, his last fight. A very enticing matchup, which just didn't happen because TJ Dillashaw had one arm. Nobody noticed somehow that the man had one of his arms missing until about 20 seconds into the first round. And then before that, is it fair to call the Petr Yan fight an asterisk? I mean,
certainly one where you can look at it and you can be like, yes, Aljamain Sterling deserved to win this fight. Scoring is fairly clear cut.
Unquestionably,
There's
yes.
no real argument for a Yan win. Is also a fight where you're just like, oh, you really could have won that, Petr Yan.
Yeah.
You have to lay the blame for losing it at Jan's feet pretty much as you have to lay it at Aljamain's as you have to give it to Aljamain's for winning it.
Yeah, which is the case with many, many, many one-sided wins or clear-cut wins, is that it's always a mixture of one guy's great performance. I think it undeniably was from Sterling.
Well, it was still a performance which had the basic narrative of their first fight, which is Sterling doing well early and then kind of just running out of steam late.
Sure. Yeah. But the other part of that was Petr Yan, I think, despite being only, I'm just going to guess 5'4". I don't know how tall he is. Having the towering arrogance of a man 800 feet tall, really thinking basically that he didn't have to try, and his career essentially spiraling after that fight and the one before it. So it's more just in the context of what has become of Petr Yan and how little he seemed to care in that fight, how poorly prepared he seemed, if nothing else. That's the asterisk attached to it. I still think you have to give massive, massive credit to Aljamain Sterling. I mean, his record is unbelievable. Like, not all of these wins have asterisks attached to them, and they are wins over the best dudes in the division. Petr Yan twice, technically. Corey Sandhagen, before that, he just mopped the floor with Corey Sandhagen. He had a super gutsy, thrilling, mostly stand-up fight with Pedro Munoz, which he won very clearly. Yeah, and the wins before that were all against like the guys you got to beat to get to the title picture. Very convincing wins against Jimmy Rivera, Cody Stamann, and Brett Johns. So unquestionably, Aljamain Sterling has an incredible streak. And why then does it feel once again like this just fundamentally isn't a good matchup for him?
I think mainly it's because Cejudo is a extremely dangerous combination, being one of the most physically overwhelming fighters to ever step foot into the octagon.
Yeah.
But also being just a smart, thoughtful student of the game.
Yeah.
The amount of changes that Cejudo has gone through in his MMA career have been pretty remarkable. When he was first coming up through the flyweight division, was interesting to look at him as he progressed, because you got the impression that he was a fighter who was sort of succeeding in spite of himself, and to spite the people around him. Because what he basically was a high volume clinch fighter, just boxing his way into the clinch and working from there. He disdained using takedowns. He didn't throw with a lot of power.
No.
And
sort of an early stage Drew Dober kind of kickboxing style from that version of Cejudo.
Yeah, over time we've seen him sort of fold his wrestling more into his game. And we've seen him grow into just a fearsome power puncher.
Yeah. And the style with which he delivers those punches has changed dramatically. I mean, I think for the last several years, he has been partnering in camp with Patricio Pitbull and Pitbull's people. And you can see a lot of elements of the latter-day Pitbull style in the performances Cejudo has been delivering. It's much more... I mean, it's a karate type of stance that he starts out of, ready to counter, light on his feet, but also ready to just blitz in with devastating shots. You have also seen, though, in some of the more recent fights, just a straight up improvement in Cejudo's boxing. I mean, like Pitbull, he pairs that karate look from long range with really a very solid, planted, tight punching form in the pocket. I'm still incredibly impressed with the boxing we saw from him, basically going back almost to the Benavidez fight. It was like right after the loss to Demetrius Johnson, he started to reinvent the hell out of himself. And we have seen many different looks, like Ricky Simone last week. I think a mark of Cejudo's career has been his flexibility, his willingness to sort of almost entirely change styles from one fight to the next. He is a shockingly all-terrain kind of fighter. But yeah, more dangerous, more comfortable everywhere, more willing to use his wrestling, a great athlete. If it wasn't for the 3-year layoff, I think I might pick him quite confidently here.
I mean, but also, it's worth pointing out that so much of Aljamain's career, you mentioned, all those great fights and those wins and so on, has been people confidently picking against him.
100%.
Going back
I've
to
been one of them.
Going back to pretty much like the Munoz fight. Because that was the one where people were like, what's he going to do? He can't take Munoz down, and if he does, he's going to be in trouble. And other than that, he's just going to get low kicked and beaten up by a power puncher with a incredibly durable chin. How is Aljamain Sterling going to win this fight? He's not going to backpack Munoz. It is worth considering that those basic elements of the matchup are sort of what you would consider Henry Cejudo to be in his current state.
Yeah, he's just like a souped-up Pedro Munoz without the guillotine. Instead, he's got a, crushing front headlock game to compensate. He's got just a phenomenal all-around wrestling game. I mean, Cejudo's, few people even try because of it, other than Demetrius Johnson, who will take down anybody and everybody given the chance. Statistically, Cejudo's takedown defense is 93%. I'm pretty sure Demetrius Johnson is the only guy against which he has allowed even one takedown. And I think it was just one in their second fight. So it's got to be even better than Munoz's takedown defense.
Yeah, like he is faster than Munoz. He is defensively better. That is certainly one of the things that you've seen from him.
Yeah, he's just as durable.
It's just as durable.
Just as willing, if not at this stage, more willing to use that durability very aggressively. I mean, that is something I was mentioning before. The Marlon Moraes fight, the Dominic Cruz one, early stages of Cejudo's career, and I think it bit him in the ass in his first fight with DJ. But at many times it has been an asset that he's just like very bold and committed to his game plan. And if his game plan has to go through a range where he might eat some punches or put himself in some positions where it's like, if he wasn't so amazing an athlete, he'd be in trouble. He's willing to put himself in those positions. Even that Dominic Cruz fight was notable for that. He was like, I'm going to low kick this guy. The exchanges got kind of weird and hairy right from the start. Cruz is trying to counter him. Cruz was even threatening him with takedowns. And, he was catching his low kicks at a certain point, and Cejudo just accepted all of that and just went for it anyway. When he has a game plan in mind, he's very difficult to put off. You can't scare Cejudo off, I guess, is the main point.
I will say, I think there is, at least in the Cruz and the Moraes fights, there's certainly sense that he is looking for the track to run down before he does it. Because I think in the Cruz fight, he's essentially dictating the fight and where it's going to be and how it's going to go right from the start. He's just backs Cruz up to the cage, starts low kicking him around it, and then he's just settled into that fight. One of the things we were really noted about the Moraes fight at the time is we were just like, what is he doing?
Yeah.
What is he doing in the first round of this fight? All he does is just soak up damage. And then decides, right, I'm just going to chase this guy and bomb him with right hands, and essentially does that.
Uh-huh. It wasn't the most sophisticated game plan, was it?
Yeah. But, it worked, and it destroyed Marlon Moraes forever. So I do think there is a solid chance that, that is one of the things that I think, given a 3-year layoff, and given the fact that he has been coaching and sort of, you've seen him have these analysis sessions with him and DJ, which are great, by the way. It's something I'd really love to see.
Me too, absolutely.
Just like these two all-time greats just chilling over their fights and just being like, look, that's where you got me. Wasn't that great?
I appreciate that anytime. Even when it's somebody as unlikable as Conor McGregor, I did enjoy that clip from the bare knuckle event last weekend of him shouting out for Eddie Alvarez to throw the uppercut and Alvarez landing it and then acknowledging McGregor in the crowd. Old rivals working together. Who doesn't like that?
Yeah. I do think more so than physical deterioration, which you can't necessarily say until you've seen it. I do think that this will result in a slower paced Cejudo, a more cautious and feeling his way into the fight version of himself than you might have seen in say some of his earlier absolutely crazy performances against the fight against Joe B, which is just one of those absolute prime examples of a A-plus athlete simply splurging power and durability the entire time.
Yeah.
It's no, I'm just going to go 100 miles an hour for the entirety of this fight because I can.
Yeah.
I'm going to eat massive shots. I don't care. It's just going to, all it is just going to be violence from bell to bell. So yeah, I do expect him to. I expect that to have mentally made a difference, if nothing else. And I expect him to have to work his way into the fight, and that is something where I think Sterling has probably gone in the other direction to at least some extent. Sterling is definitely someone who looks to shock his opponent and dictate right from the opening battle.
That is true, yeah.
He is someone who has, not because it is in any way, I think, actually particularly natural to him, simply because he has learned that this is just a really good way of winning fights, is that you just, in this sport and in that division, have to dictate your game right from the jump. And, it has gotten him into trouble in that he can't actually maintain that pace, it seems, against the very, very top of the division. But he is a very diverse, obviously very offensively potent fighter. So, yes, I do at least expect this to follow a, I guess I expect Aljamain to win at least the first round. But also, if Cejudo is anything like his former self, I expect him to probably be winning the later ones.
Yeah, that seems a very natural pattern to expect. I also think, outside of whatever psychological changes Cejudo might have undergone, you also just it's very difficult to just get in his grill early. As you said, maybe Cejudo could do it if he's willing to just take shots and make crazy exchanges happen and trust that he's gonna he's gonna weather that. Even Petr Yan didn't do that. He actually let Sterling spend the energy. Maybe it's doable to just try to put a scare in Sterling. Maybe it's even a good idea, I suppose, depending on how much Cejudo agrees with Dominic Cruz that there's no such thing as ring rust, even though there obviously is. But I think it's difficult against Sterling. I mean, he is actually this whole winning streak has largely been defined by him being positionally, in the most basic sense, a pretty solid boxer. That doesn't mean that he doesn't still overcompensate defensively. He doesn't put himself off balance. He doesn't force himself into some sketchy resets from time to time. But what I really mean is that he is somebody who will present you with his jab, and he holds his ground relatively well, and he will positionally confront somebody who's trying to just come in on him, even if he's not the one coming forward. He's actually pretty difficult to run over. I think Pedro Munoz thought he was going to run Sterling over, and it just doesn't tend to happen. So, yeah, I agree with that. I don't know though. What are Aljamain Sterling's ways to win the whole fight? I mean,
whatever his ways to win the whole
fight.
I
know. Usually it comes down to one way or the other being able to backpack somebody.
But that has happened once out of his last.
Well, it happened to Petr Yan,
which was against Yan,
and it happened to Corey Sandhagen. He
so.
just happened to choke him out instantly after getting to his back. So that's usually it. The first Petr Yan fight doesn't really count as a win, even though it is, of course, a perfectly justifiable, the only fair result for that fight. It's not a win in competitive terms. And I guess it happened in the Dillashaw one too, but again, the asterisks. So his last two fights that actually mean anything, he has backpacked his opponent. It does just seem like a very difficult path to get there. What are Sterling's go-to takedowns? He's really a single leg guy and a body lock guy.
There is notably I think a Twitter thread by Miguel Class, who's of how reliably Aljo converts court kicks into takedowns.
That's a good point, too.
And given that this is Henry Cejudo's primary range weapon, I mean, this is another interesting thing about Cejudo as this protein adaptive fighter, is that he spent much of that Moraes fight just getting his legs chewed up at range.
Yeah, and the second DJ fight.
Yeah. And then came in against Dominic Cruz and just did exactly that to Dominic Cruz.
Yes.
Like, he is someone who is talented and physically gifted enough that he can literally just add entire pieces into his game like that.
Yeah.
But I do think that, I think that the question is, like, can Aljamain convert the kicks into takedowns against Henry Cejudo?
Yeah. And as long as that's not happening, for however long it takes Cejudo to try to build himself into the fight, what else is he going to be doing to rack up damage? I think Sterling's own kicking game will be effective. He's got great body kicks, which have frequently been very effective against Henry Cejudo, or at least have been able to land clean. He throws pretty good, like, step-in knees. Those tend to work. The thing is that the whole Sterling has to backpack somebody to win suggests that the takedown threat is one-sided. I don't imagine that Henry Cejudo is not going to take a takedown if it's given to him either. And Cejudo, again, somebody who's willing to just take damage and convert it into offense. The number of times I have seen Cejudo like run torso or face first into a knee or a kick, and his immediate reaction being to just grab it and hit a takedown, are too many to count. He does it all the time. It even happened against Cruz. Old Dominic Cruz caught him with a knee, which you might suggest is a good sign for Sterling, who likes those weapons and uses them well against Jan in both fights. But then Cruz got taken down. And I think the problem there is that Sterling's not going to get like easily out-grappled by Cejudo, but I think it's a perfectly viable idea for Cejudo to just make him scramble early. Make him fight for position, rather than just defending takedowns and maybe ending up in a worse position. Just make Sterling work whenever they go to the ground. That certainly worked for Petr Yan the first time around. I don't.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking when you were talking about that. Is like, I don't think. I mean, but in the Cruz fight, Cormier, I think, is talking about Cruz's. Cejudo's improvements to his top game. And they're saying, in the camp, they were saying, his top game's gotten so much better. And he takes Cruz down, and then Cruz just immediately gets up again.
Yeah.
Then it's just like, well, okay, there are some things that maybe Henry Cejudo is not actually.
It's also Dominic Cruz. I mean, it's very likely his top control game has gotten better. It doesn't mean you're going to hold down Dominic Cruz. Basically, nobody does that.
Yeah, I mean, based on previous things that we've seen, I don't think Cejudo can hold Aljamain Sterling down.
No.
He's very tired, but
he can make him scramble.
Can get him to that point where he will be very tired.
Yeah. And I think, honestly, I don't think it would be crazy for not to force it, but Sterling is going to be using his kicks. Just make him fight for position every time he kicks. I don't think that would be a bad idea. Not to even seek a strong grappling advantage, just to make him fight and expend energy. We basically have no reason to think that Cejudo won't be basically perfectly fresh in the later rounds. He has never had an issue with cardio.
That is one of the things about the EJ fight, is that I don't think there isn't really an argument for Cejudo winning it, in my opinion, but
yeah,
he's like, DJ is undeniably looking pretty ragged by the end. And Cejudo just looks exactly the same as he ever does.
And that just making DJ fight the wrestling was a huge part of the strategy. Not only did he get some good top position for DJ, more than most opponents do, but also a lot of the early rounds of that fight were spent just trying takedowns. And I think in the Let's look at the stats. I want to say, like, per round, he maybe has to fight off, like, 5 shots on more than one occasion. The stats don't say so much. They say 0 of 3 in round 3. I just watched it. I swear to God, there are, like, 6 or 7. Maybe they don't count every attempted takedown as a real attempt if he bails on it quickly, but there are a lot of just sort of incidental scrambles created by Henry Cejudo pressuring into wrestling positions. Yeah, I mean, are we going to do it again? Or are we just going to let Aljamain Sterling prove us wrong again? I'd love to see it. I don't want Henry Cejudo to be champion. Nothing against the guy, you know. If anything, he's become less cringy and less annoying by a long measure, since, you know, 3 or 4 years ago. He's quite endearing now. He was endearing already. He was just like annoying, but he was, you know, likably annoying in a weird way. I don't have anything against him. I just, you know, I want the guys who have been fighting for like divisional spots. You know, I want the guys on the conveyor belt to be contesting this title, but I think I'm about to pick Henry Cejudo. I think I just did.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I think I'm going to pick Sterling.
Okay, we'll lay out the path before we wrap this segment up. I got to hear what you picture, because that is my problem. I could see a lot of individual ideas that will work. And again, this has happened in multiple previous Sterling fights where I don't see how it gets put together into a winning game plan, and then it does. But what's the game plan?
I think he just gets out in front early. Again, I'm not sure I trust Cejudo to be proactive enough in the early going of the fight.
Too low output.
Think Sterling is going to be a lot bigger than him.
True.
And, you know, as much as, like, Cruz was also bigger than him, he's still not, I think, as big as Aljamain Sterling, and also he was, as we said, still a good win, but obviously this is not prime Dominic Cruz.
Yeah.
Aljamain Sterling is actually in the prime of his career. Aljamain Sterling is a more offensively potent striker than Dominic Cruz. Like, quite some margin, I would say, at this point.
Yeah, he definitely is. He works the body,
it's
too.
Just the feeling, it's also just, like, a weird feeling that I have that, like, Aljo is quite good at this kind of matchup. Because, you know, if you find yourself thinking, like, he has to fight someone who has basically borderline infinite durability, infinite gas tank, just a little squat monster who will just never stop coming after him, and who will just shake things off the entire time. He fights this guy all the time. His name is Merab Dvalishvili.
That's true. That is very true.
And, like, weirdly, like, I get the impression of those two, like, between those two, is that, like, you know, after his last win, Merab was like, he's the real champion. He's the champion. We know this.
That Sterling beats him in the gym.
It wasn't one of, I didn't get the impression that, like, Merab, it was one of these situations where Merab was like, he knew that he has Aljo's number, that he's a better fighter than him.
That's actually an interesting point, that maybe, you know, like, fighters as, like, wolves, that there's maybe an actual, more than just the, like, loyalty and good, like, fellow feeling that Dvalishvili has for a guy who is his friend. But it's maybe also a respect born of, this guy has my number in the gym. Yeah, you know what? As much as I don't, you might be swaying me, because I've looked at this the whole time through, like, what's the clear way for Aljo to win? How does Cejudo win? Am I expecting him to knock Sterling out?
I mean, Cejudo basically we're presuming he's going to use some kind of hybrid of the Cruz and DJ performances, right?
Yeah.
He's going to try and low kick with Aljo, cut him off, push him around the outside of the cage, and use takedowns to takedowns to drain Aljo's gas tank. Again, I'm not sure I trust Cejudo, who throughout his career has sort of his wrestling has come and gone. I'm not sure if I trust him not to just have to just shelve his takedowns again. Because he's done it so many times throughout his career, and you hear him talking so much in, so much of what he's been talking about, like when he was like lecturing McGregor on his striking technique. I think he's really fallen in love with his, with the idea of himself as like a really good striker.
Oh, absolutely. He loves striking. I mean, it's clear he has really developed a passion for it. He enjoys it. You've seen how much he's transformed his striking style in the past few years. He is, more than anything, a student of that game.
And yeah, I mean, and the thing is that Aljo doesn't have to convert. Well, I think the idea of Aljo being able to win rounds on the feet, and again, that's one of the things. That's one of the other things that Petr Yan fight hinged on, is that like Aljo just kind of won round one on the feet.
Yeah. Both of them. I mean, he, as much as it pissed off the Yan boys when we said it at the time, it's still true that Aljo, was pretty clearly winning the first round and a half against Petr Yan on the feet.
Yeah. I mean, in the first one, he got dropped, but other than that.
Yeah. There were some moments, but he was, what I mean is that process-wise, he was putting all the damage on Petr Yan. He was putting all the volume on him, rather, and was putting his shots together really, really well. Yeah. Still might just get dropped. Yeah, I don't know. Cejudo just the power puncher, just finding a good shot. Cejudo outlasting Aljamain Sterling. There are ways. But
you can also do things like you can look at Cejudo's fight against Dominic Cruz and then look at Aljo's fight against Marlon Moraes, and you can be like, oh, those are pretty similar, right?
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the general story of, someone waiting on low kicks and then going into a level change and then just getting instantly knocked out.
Yeah, I mean, the knockout is virtually identical.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, if Cejudo wants to chase Aljo around the cage kicking him, that is almost certainly... he's got tape to look at which will... which supports that. But yeah, I mean, I've generally been pretty impressed at Aljo's approaches for his opponents. He's another one of those fighters where you can often say, you can't criticize him for, can't really criticize him for his approach.
Never.
Criticize him for his inability to sustain it. But in terms of we going back to the Sandhagen fight, we were like, Aljo has gotten much better at dictating the space in the cage, and Sandhagen gives up his back, and then sure enough, that's almost what happens to the T.
Yeah.
So I do expect Sterling to have a better idea of where he is in the cage than Cruz does.
Cejudo,
Cruz, I think, is always just on the understanding that he can move around in neutral space and get away from anything, so he doesn't really care where he is in the cage so much. But that was obviously a big problem for him in that fight.
Just getting run more and more into the fence.
Yeah, Aljamain is pretty good positionally.
He is.
I mean, I don't know. I just don't really... I think it's another one of those ones where I think all the intangibles are in Cejudo's favor. I just don't super trust him.
Yeah.
And I've had enough surprising smart performances from Aljamain that I'm willing to take the flyer on him.
Yeah, so I mean, Aljo's entire run of wins here is a huge part of the reason why we've found occasion to praise Sarah Longo. It's a two-part thing. They're a good game planning camp, and Sterling is a good game plan follower. He is a guy who will adapt and stick to, much as you can praise Cejudo for his flexibility, right? We have seen a lot of different little tweaks to the basic Aljamain Sterling game that have got him to victory. There's not a lot in common between the approaches he took to, say, Pedro Munoz, Corey Sandhagen, and both of the two Piotr Jan fights were all like, at least at the outset, good game plans, good ideas, that all started and progressed pretty differently. So yeah, fuck it. I mean, given that our picks don't matter and that they're wrong anyway, may as well allow you to sway me and allow us to be swayed at last by Aljamain Sterling, who is undoubtedly a very good fighter and a good champion, and he has earned our trust, except for the fact that our trust will surely fall like a curse on his head.
Yeah, it's an albatross.
So, sorry, Aljo, but I guess we're picking you to win early and then sort of, not impressively, but effectively survive whatever happens late. Okay. Well, that's a very long segment, but an interesting discussion. Not an easy fight to figure out, in my opinion. So I'm glad that we got so much out of it. When we return, we are going to have a few more somewhat straightforward fights. Bilal Muhammad versus Gilbert Burns. We've got Jessica Andrade, Jian Xiaonan, Kron Gracie versus Charles Jourdain. A couple of these might end up being a bonus episode, depending on how much time we have. And then, of course, we have to wrap things up by recapping last week's main event, Song Yadong versus Ricky Simone. All of that after this.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
Welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are talking now about UFC 288's co-main event, Bilal Muhammad versus Gilbert Burns. He's made it. At long last, many years, finally getting a TKO win, riding a, what is it? 1, 2, 3, 4. A 9-fight unbeaten streak, including the one no contest to Leon Edwards. Bilal Muhammad has reached his career-long goal, the first welterweight in history to not be the main event over a pair of bantamweights.
Hey.
Co-main event for contendership. Yeah.
This fight is bullshit.
Why is it bullshit?
Because Colby coming, like, these two guys.
Yeah.
These two guys.
These are the challengers.
To be like the next in line after Colby fucking Covington.
Yeah, these are the challengers for the title. Right here. They're fighting. Yeah. They're fighting.
Both of these guys have stepped in to essentially wager, both of whom should essentially be number one contender fight. You know, if this is the case where the UFC is lining up 2 consecutive welterweight title fights, it should be these two.
Yeah.
It should be one and then the other.
But what do you mean? The fans love Colby Covington.
Yes. Or potentially, you know, Colby Covington, if he wants to the shot, should fight Shavkat Rakhmonov, or maybe have like a third fight with Kamaru Usman, because that's what his resume hinges on. The fact that these two guys, the ones who will fight anyone and who have taken the longest possible road, had to take this bout on 2 weeks' notice, and either one of them will presumably drop straight out of contention with a loss, is bullshit.
Is this 2 weeks' notice?
Something like that, yeah.
Oh, Jesus. Yeah, it is bullshit. I'm mad now. I hadn't even thought of it in that perspective. I kind of forgot that, like, Leon Edwards is the champion on the back of his best career performance, and they immediately tried and apparently succeeded to. Although, I don't know. Has Leon accepted that fight? He basically said, fuck off.
No. Yeah, I mean, but they're still, like, they're presumably, they've basically said they're going to play the hardest possible ball to get him to accept.
Well, that's great. We love that. It's so worth making the guy who is peaking like never before sit out and testing his patience and wearing out what remains of his prime so that you can cram Colby Covington into a third title fight.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it does suck.
And yeah, I mean, both of these guys, as said, have like really earned it. You know, Bilal, remember the name Muhammad. I mean, this is one of the longest streaks in UFC history without a title shot.
Yeah.
This is up there with,
Max
Tony
Holloway.
Ferguson at least had an interim belt.
Yeah, it's up there with Ferguson with Max Holloway. He went on like a 10-fight win streak before he got his shot against Aldo. Yeah.
And obviously, like, both men have fought down the division, like two of the few in welterweight who are willing to fight down, and that's exactly why they find themselves here.
That's true.
Because they're, like, the ones who will accept fights. Apart from Vicente Luque, who did that until he aged out.
Yeah, one of those losses during that process being Bilal Muhammad.
So yeah, I'm annoyed by it, but it will be a great fight. So we talked about Cejudo and Sterling as great game planners, and obviously we have, I'll remember the name Muhammad, making this a pretty high IQ card.
Yeah, this is the strategy headlining. I don't know what word I'm looking for. These are all strategists. Yada, yada, yada. Bilal Muhammad, we have praised for nothing so much as his ability to come up with his team, of course, but to come up with and stick to a variety of different game plans throughout his career. It is really his defining strength, his well-roundedness, and how he uses that well-roundedness to beat a wide variety of different opponents. A few of which, as you pointed out, are wrestlers, which may be a factor here because, much like Sterling against Cejudo, this feels like a fight where sort of just Bilal's own wrestling, a major part of his well-rounded approach, is just going to kind of be a non-factor. Maybe he can tie Gilbert up. Maybe he can use the threats to make something else happen, but it does not seem like he's going to be able to out-wrestle Gilbert Burns, not only because Burns is a strong defensive wrestler, but also just a physical beast compared to Bilal. The other question pertaining to that we had to ask is, does that mean Gilbert Burns can out-wrestle Bilal Muhammad? And it's a little more difficult to say than you would like. Bilal's takedown defense is remarkably high, statistically. But the best wrestler he's ever fought was probably Sean Brady, who
it's probably, to be honest, it's Damian Maia, but obviously Damian Maia was quite shocked by the time he fought.
Yeah, I don't know if that version of Damian Maia was as good a wrestler as the version of Sean Brady he fought, and that version of Sean Brady really didn't try to press the wrestling until he desperately needed the takedowns because he was in terrible shape. Bilal did completely shut them down with ease. And I think you could probably argue that the number of shots he took early, in addition to just being a thing that happens in Bilal Muhammad fights, may have to do with the fact that he had to stay aware of the takedown threat. But when it reared its head, he was absolutely ready to stop it. Quick underhooks, quick sprawls, like no ground made whatsoever for Sean Brady in the wrestling department. So it's a good look. But it's still a bit more of an open question than I would like, whether Gilbert Burns can maybe surprise Bilal with some quick and powerful takedowns. It's a possibility.
Yeah, I mean, in both cases, I don't think there's any like strong historical precedent in at least recent fights that either guy looks particularly out-wrestleable in any way.
No.
I mean, Burns obviously was out-wrestleable in the past. I think that fight with what's his face, Cube Prazeres. Like that was obviously one where he just got pushed into the fence and like physically bullied and eventually broken down.
More like Presquare-ish, am I right?
You're not wrong. Chimaev against Burns, was able to get him down, but wasn't able to do anything with it.
No.
And more than that, just kind of gave up afterwards.
Yeah.
Admittedly, he might have been able to toss it more, but we're talking one of the biggest modern welterweights, a very good wrestler and top player.
Yeah.
Just on pure physicality, Chimaev is leagues beyond.
Yeah.
Bilal, I'll remember the name Muhammad.
I really don't see Bilal being able to get Gilbert down or keep him down at all. But that being said, my feeling is pretty much that I don't think Gilbert's going to be able to out-wrestle Bilal either. I think we're looking at largely a striking affair. And in that kind of fight, I think the big question I have here is, obviously Gilbert Burns is going to land a huge shot on Bilal, multiple huge shots in the first round. He's going to test his chin. He may very well hurt him. But my big question is really, how's Gilbert Burns at fighting off the back foot? Because I have a strong feeling that Bilal Muhammad is going to try to pressure him. Is going to try to push him up against the cage, keep him on the end of his jab, and put him in defensive positions. It's what he did against Sean Brady. Obviously, it lost him the first round of that fight. Obviously, that's nothing remarkable.
I watched it again. I'm not actually sure he lost the first round.
He definitely, I think he definitely lost it. I mean, he ate a bunch of clean left hooks from Sean Brady in the first couple minutes. But he lost it in the service of sticking to his game plan, and I think he could feel it even as he was getting hit clean, that Sean Brady was not enjoying this, that he was lashing out a little too desperately. And Bilal was completely happy to keep taking that punishment if it meant keeping Sean Brady, keeping that slow cooking process going, keeping him on the simmer, pushing him backwards. And by the end of the first round, Brady is already gassing. He is already taking a lot more clean shots in return. And then the second round, he is just in complete panic mode the entire time because Bilal will not stop pressuring him. I think that would be really a very good idea. Very few people have even really tried to pressure Gilbert Burns super hard. Like the version of Kamaru he fought, which might have been a very stiff test of his back foot striking. It was a version of Kamaru that had basically decided he didn't care about pressuring anymore. Otherwise, recent fights are Neil Magny, Stephen Thompson. Khamzat Chimaev, I guess, met him in the middle of the cage. Did he do much pressuring?
It's just a crazy war, that fight.
Yeah. Tyron Woodley, Gunnar Nelson, none of these are pressure fighters at all.
Yeah, but that's one of the things I think with Burns is that he is quite insistent in being on the front foot nowadays. So I'm not sure how. I'm curious, how the directionality plays out, because I think both men know that they want the other guy up against the fence.
Yeah,
but neither one of them has. Both of their last fights. So Bilal had the issue of being tuned up a bit by Sean Brady, who is who's not a particularly fantastic striker.
He's a competent but uncomfortable striker.
But the directionality of the fight was that he was pushing him up against the cage the whole time, and that you knew that he was going to fall apart. Burns, on the other hand, had a similarly unimpressive fight with Jorge Masvidal. He also sort of had to come back from not coming back. He was never losing the fight. He wasn't looking great early.
Yeah.
But he was being much more sort of patient and back foot and just fighting in a way that didn't really maximize anything that he was good at.
Yeah.
So, in terms of neither of them actually looking tremendous in their last fights, I do find myself thinking that at least Bilal was taking the optimal approach and taking the licks that came along with it.
Yeah.
what else? Like, don't know how much I trust. I think again, like, probably in a mistaken way, I'm going against the basic physical matchups for both of these fights. Because Cejudo and Burns are obviously much more athletic than Aljamain and Bilal, remember the name, Muhammad.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not sure if I trust Burns to be able to fight a high-paced fight that isn't power shots the entire time. Because that's not how Bilal fights. It's how he's kind of drowned a lot of power punches, is that he's much more in the sort of slightly Diaz-esque mold of just, landing short shots the entire time.
Very much
Doesn't overcommit. Admittedly, this has meant that he's never actually knocked anyone down.
I mean, even in the Sean Brady fight, I think we saw there that, like, he's actually not really capable of throwing punches that are that hard.
Yes, that is very true.
He can put steam on them, but it took him, even after Brady rocking him with a right hand, how many more shots did he have to deliver to force what was still a standing TKO? He couldn't put Brady down. He's just not a big puncher, but his style embraces that. I mean, that's why he's really high output and does lots and lots of work behind his jab and tries to work every target available to him.
Yep. Muhammad is fortunate in this fight in that this particular brave Brazilian is who will take fights and keep divisions moving is for once not a southpaw.
Yeah.
Which, if he was, I would confidently pick him.
100%. Bilal, the jab-centric striking game just does not work as well against lefties. We've seen that many times.
I will say that does mean that we have... I think a big dynamic of this fight is going to be the jab and the low kick.
Yeah.
Like, from both guys to at least some extent. And that is, I think, more than the wrestling, more even than the power, I think that is the thing that Bilal, remember the name, Muhammad, has to worry about.
Yeah. He has been chewed up with low kicks in more than one fight in the past.
Hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. I just feel like, and again, like I'm wrong, so, so, because I'm talking myself into a pick and I see the game plan, that means that like what I'm overlooking is some basic truth where it's like, oh, just because these things are possible doesn't mean they're going to happen.
It's going to be like one of these ones where, Burns just low kicks him and Muhammad lands his hardest counterpunch as it happens.
Yeah.
And then Burns just eats it, and Muhammad's leg comes off. You'll be like, oh, yeah.
Oh, shit. Yeah, Gilbert also, as much as I don't really trust him in a sustained fight going backwards, he does have a counter left hook. He has exactly the shot that gave Bilal the most trouble from Sean Brady. He will just catch and pitch with that. That's not the term, is it? Is it? That's like gay sex, right? What's the term?
I think it is.
Catch and shoot, whatever.
Catch and pitch, yeah.
Yeah, he has a gay sex style left hook. And, yeah, that obviously can trouble Bilal. He'll come in with his head completely right in the center, firing his jab, and it'll hang out there and the left hook will catch him. There are many, many reasons to think that, like, no matter how good Bilal's game plan is, this is just one of those physical ceiling fights. But, fuck it, I'm still gonna pick him. I think he can put Gilbert on the back foot. Yes, he has been very insistent in coming forward, but again, like, the most he got out of Khamzat Chimaev was a largely neutral fight, in which both guys kind of took turns thinking they were the slick one. When Gilbert was the one on the back foot, he was generally losing. He was getting caught clean. He got dropped with a jab while he was on the back foot. I just think he's somebody whose striking works best when he's super insistent. That being said, he's going to find some counters. I don't know. Fuck it. I'm picking Bilal. He's going to lose, but I'm picking him anyway.
Yeah, I'm really tempted to, but then I just thought, like, really expect him to lose the first round.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Possibly pretty badly. And then all that needs to happen is that he needs to get dropped in one more round. And that's the fight. And yeah, that's assuming that like Burns doesn't jump on him and finish him. Yeah, I don't think he looked great. I think I thought Burns looked a little concerning against Masvidal. But yeah, I think it is one of those ones where like I value strong starts quite heavily, in part because they often compromise the other fighter.
With good reason.
Like, so yeah, and I have to pick a strong one from Burns, especially like 3 rounds, and you're picking like, well, remember the name Muhammad as one of MMA's premier game planners. He had to do it on 2 weeks' notice. Like he didn't even have the time to really be able to figure out the guy who's in front of him. And so much of it had to be just like, I think, wait. And yeah, I don't think it's a good setup for him. I think I'll be pleased and impressed if he wins, but the more I think about it, I think I have to pick Gilbert Burns.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Burns is himself a great, brave, awesome fighter. It's just that, yeah, I don't want to see either one of these guys get derailed, and it's just a tragedy that it kind of has to happen.
It's inevitable, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think you're probably right. But whatever. I'm slowly over the course of my career in picking fights, just sort of not caring about being right anymore. All I care about is
happens. Yeah, basically just become like Alistair Overeem over time. You're just like, you realize there's no KO horrific enough that you can't just like get up after it and be like, oh yeah, it happened. You just get inured.
Yeah, all that matters is that I had the right idea, and I will live to pick another day. Can I get some of that? What's the analyst version of horse meat? Because that would make this whole process, frankly, a lot easier to bear. If I could just juice up.
I wish that was true. I mean, that's why we're the real heroes. There's no performance-enhancing drugs for us.
Yeah. We are good. We're cool. All right. Let's take one more break then. I think we'll probably do a smattering of other UFC 288 fights in a short bonus episode. And after this, we got to come back and talk about last week's main event, Song Yadong versus Ricky Simone, a very interesting fight, which we are going to get into after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are 1 or 2 of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
Welcome back for Bantamweights. Song Yadong, Ricky Simone. Very interesting fight, Phil. I found this one super compelling all throughout. I think this is one of those where one guy very clearly had the better performance. And yet I think both fighters comported themselves quite well. I think Song Yadong showed a little bit of that new level of maturity we've been looking for, while still being essentially the Song Yadong we've come to know and love and get frustrated by. And I think Ricky Simone suffered from a few of the concerns we expressed last week. In particular, there was definitely the feeling of him sort of having to find it as the fight went along and coming to the right ideas way too late and after giving Song Yadong too much time to formulate his own ideas. But I think we also saw Ricky Simone's, flexibility, his ability to actually hang with Song Yadong in the feet. I think really what this fight felt like to me is that Ricky Simone very clearly lost and was losing most of the time, and yet was maybe a slightly better game plan away from this being a pretty winnable matchup.
Yeah, this was one of those ones where I felt like it's a bit like the old adage, the one where we talk about pole fighters going up against each other, right? And we used to talk about, John Jones in this way, is that people would be like, can he handle people with a long reach? And then eventually it became like, after a while, he's fought quite a lot of these guys, and then often the people that he's fought against have have never fought someone with his range. He sort of climbed the experience hill in terms of that physical disparity.
Mm-hmm.
With this case, I found myself looking at it, and I was like, in many ways, Ricky Simone, this is the first time you have fought someone who is more athletic than you.
Yeah.
And feel like that kind of shocked him out of his, not necessarily out of his game plan, but into a sort of slightly warped version of his game plan. Because having listened to him beforehand and, knowing what we know about Song Yadong and how he's lost to Corey Sandhagen and so on, the obvious plan was give Song Yadong a lot to think about.
Mm-hmm.
Takedowns, strikes, keep him guessing, keep him planted, keep him swinging. Essentially, as we said, the Sandhagen game plan. And could see how Song Yadong's responses to that kind of pushed Simone out of that approach to some extent. Because I think once he actually clashed with Song Yadong, once he tried shooting on him.
Was that a pun? Because there was a notable clash of heads.
Yeah. Once Song Yadong just brushed him aside.
Yeah.
From his first shot, and once Song Yadong started kicking with him, I think he started realizing, oh my god, this guy's really fast and powerful.
Yeah.
And a lot of that kind of, I'm going to keep him moving. I'm going to keep him, I'm going to keep him trying to figure out what's coming. Sort of subconsciously got turned into, kind of need to stay away from this guy.
Yeah. And which then became, I'm going to keep giving him just enough to think about to help him generate new ideas of how to hit me. Because one notable difference in between this fight and a lot of Ricky Simone's other more recent fights, I noted specifically last week how really good he was at coming back off of his defense. And to be fair, his defense looked quite good in this fight. I mean, he was defensively aware. Song Yadong tried a lot of stupid spinning kicks that were just easily evaded by Ricky Simone. He was blocking a lot of shots. He was ducking a lot of shots. He was moving his head from slot to slot in the midst of combinations. He was doing preemptive defense after darting in with a strike of his own. A lot of good defensive ideas. The notable difference being that he didn't find offense off of any of them. He made Song Yadong miss a lot in this fight, and I think he was so shocked by the speed that he didn't have the confidence to actually use his defense to get in on Song Yadong, which I think would have worked. I mean, you got to slip a shot and then make him pay. And especially because his jab was working really well throughout a lot of the fight, he was clearly able to catch Song by surprise and then build short combinations on him as he took a step back. But his defense was purely defense. And so he never, ever, even when his jab was working, he never really gave Song Yadong any reason to respect him or to worry about what was coming back, because very little was. And on the flip side, Song Yadong's counterpunching was on fire and got better and better as the fight went on because he had a guy in front of him who kept giving him basically one thing to think about. One strike, one short combination, whatever. By the time Ricky Simone was in the position of having to build and having to try to put damage on Song Yadong, Song was able to just light him up with counters. The counter left hooks he landed in the last 3-4 minutes of this fight were amazing. They weren't the only ones of the fight, but he kept finding them in more and more like fraught exchanges because Ricky Simone was building on nothing. He had not spent the early going actually laying the groundwork for those longer combinations he was forced to try much later in the fight. Yeah.
I think it was just one of those ones where, like, I think Simone just found that he just couldn't cover distance safely, and so it just deterred him from from working in his own offense. I mean, in some ways, it made me once again think how good Corey Sandhagen is, how difficult that game plan was to pull off, because I think this was a better performance from Song Yadong, but it was still one which is very much in line with, we're still very much seeing the same fighter.
Mm-hmm.
This was mostly like he was a bit more proactive with his jab. He used more like directional cutting tools, but a lot of this was sort of enabled by the fact that, again, Simone let the direction of the fight get away from him.
Yes.
Ever since that first round, he was skirting the cage, and it sort of doesn't matter if Song Yadong plants to throw if you can basically let him trap you up against the cage, because was either forcing Simone into two pocket exchanges with a faster, stronger, more durable puncher, or it was Simone having to escape once he backed himself into the cage and getting worked to the body.
Yeah. I mean, I think Song did overswing a lot less. He was in much better position even after his misses. As you said, he did a better job of throwing away one shot to step in diagonally and cut Simone off, usually with the left hook. And I think he was a lot less over tense on his counters too, especially the counter left hook, both to the head, but also the outside slip to find the left hook to the body as a counter to the jab was really nice. Even the one that hit Ricky Simone in the dick, was still a really, really nice setup and execution, just targeting, slightly off. But yeah, I think it's impossible to look at those. These are signs of maturity to me. They are signs of better discipline. It's impossible to look at those, to fully appreciate those outside the context of Ricky Simone really not finding a way to test Song Yadong, not making him uncomfortable, not giving him any impetus to make worse decisions. He was just supremely comfortable in this entire fight, which is a terrible position to be in against Song Yadong. A fight where he is just feeling himself for 22 minutes straight is a terrible, terrible opponent to have.
And I do think one of the things about Song Yadong is that he is such a he has such a great base to build from.
Yes.
He is someone who, he can overswing, but he doesn't get out of his stance. He takes his feet with him. He is constantly ready to throw power.
Mm-hmm.
And so it doesn't take big changes for him to have disproportionately positive effects, because it's already a extremely fundamentally well designed game, which has an engine of sheer athleticism behind it. So, I mean, I do feel Ricky Simone, despite the fact that he's kind of become better at stabbing and using his defense and so on, he is someone who will leave his stance a lot more. He is a lot more ragged and, organic in that way, but he is definitely someone, and I think it was also the fact those issues were...
Hector, shut up!
Sorry, Hector is being very loud at the moment.
It's not actually bothering me. Please go on.
Yeah. There's foxes out there, right, Hector? really want to go out?
He wants to tangle with him. He doesn't give a shit.
Yeah, I mean, I think this was one of those ones where, like, Simone didn't have a athletic edge, and he didn't really have a sort of technical edge either.
No.
His edge had to come in, like, diversity and aggression and so on. And I think the song just shocked him out of it.
Yeah,
just kind of kept him there.
I think alternatively, the edge had to come from a game plan. And I don't think his game plan was particularly sophisticated. I mean, this is, he had some ideas that make sense, right? As you said, like, just give Song a lot of stuff to process. And, Colin Oyama's advice in the corner, increasingly as the fight went on, was just to, like, not give a shit about the takedowns being shut down, to just keep testing Song Yadong with that, because they needed him. Again, they needed, like, some crack to appear to actually build some kind of momentum. Because otherwise, he had tons and tons of isolated successes, but he couldn't build anything. And then he was put into a position where he was trying to build something on nothing, and that's why he got knocked out. Rushing in, putting himself out of position, as you said, trying to, like, shift in to build longer combinations without having given Song Yadong any reason to think that he couldn't just, like, find the right one of these shots to slip and return with an absolutely murderous counter shot. I think a better game plan, and this is something we pointed out, is the feeling that Ricky Simone does sort of find what he's going to do over the course of the fight. I think that started him from a deficit. One small thing, for example, like, they had the very basic idea that he's going to move away from Song Yadong's right hand. He spent the vast majority of this fight circling to the right. There is some virtue to that kind of idea. But, like, Song Yadong is not a one-handed puncher. That seemed to be the entire idea that they had regarding footwork in this fight, was just to circle to the right. That's not how footwork works. Like, one problem with that is that you are also taking yourself away from the ideal, like, positional target, which is the opponent's center line. You are, yes, moving away from his right hand, but then you're basically forcing yourself to punch across yourself. Or to reset on an actual strong angle, because sidestepping is not the same as getting to a strong angle. The strong angle is when you are facing the opponent, when you are lined up behind your lead foot and your lead shoulder, you're ready to fire your jab, the building block of all your combinations, straight down the middle. You're threatening, and your opponent feels exposed. I mean, that is a good angle to have. And sidestepping around them, yeah, you might be forcing them to reset, but are you threatening them? Are they, more than just, they have to reset their feet so they're refacing me? I felt like Ricky put himself in the position of having to chase Song a lot more with his jab, and with everything, really, because he was taking himself out of the danger zone for one of Song Yadong's weapons, still being at risk for the other one, and allowing him to use the other one to open up the one that he was worried about. In the meantime, he was not putting himself in a position to actually threaten Song Yadong. Like, there's a million fights you can look at where somebody has a dangerous right hand and their opponent, quote unquote, circles into it. That's called trying to get around their lead foot and trying to access their center, trying to align your jab, trying to create an angle from which you can take a very small step off to the side, and your own right hand and your own left hook have been opened up because you have penetrated their stance. Ricky Simone basically never got himself into those positions in this fight. He just, that's the other difficulty in trying to give Song Yadong too much information to process. That is an offensive idea. And so you have to be offensively potent in order for that game plan to work. You have to be threatening. You have to be trying to square Song Yadong up. And yeah, obviously that's dangerous too, but I felt like that kind of game plan needed a more proactive kind of technical approach from Ricky Simone. And it was,
I mean, I'm not sure that he's capable of it, to be honest.
No, probably not. But, you know,
that's the thing. I think he genuinely wanted to be. I think if he looks back at this fight, he will be shocked at how passive he was.
sure.
Because it probably felt in that fight like he was, sticking to the game plan and doing, and that he was constantly kind of working. But,
And he was. It just wasn't effective, and Song Yadong didn't have to give a shit about it. That's the problem.
yeah, it was constantly reactive as opposed to being proactive.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, as I said, I just think he just got shocked out of it right at the beginning. He was just like, so it felt like it was the game plan he was following from then, but it was not what he'd planned to do.
It was a perversion of the genuinely good idea that he had coming in.
Yeah, I mean, if you just look at like how he's moving in the cage, where he is in the cage in the first round, as opposed to like rounds 2, 3, 4.
Yeah,
it's very different.
Every piece of footwork, every defensive reaction, everything took him away from Song Yadong. And yeah, I mean, there were enough moments though. Again, like, I don't even think he has to be that much more technically sophisticated. Coaches telling him like, "Hey, get your jab on him," putting him through drills where he is, taking those little pivot steps clockwise to the left, and threatening and looking to build that way, but also just standing his ground more. Yes, it would have put him in some positions where his defense would have been tested, but he was already in that position again. And there were enough moments in this fight where, for one reason or another, often I think it was that Song Yadong just like took a minute to rest, where Ricky Simone did press forward, and categorically he had more success in those moments. He was actually able to build a few times to put 3, 4 jabs in a row sometimes to snap Song Yadong's head back. Anytime he did find a moment to come forward, he looked way better. So yeah, that would have needed to be appreciated, I think, in the preparation. As it was though, given a pretty, I think, psychologically and stylistically easy dynamic to work with, I thought Song Yadong did not look like a guy. He did not approach that situation like a guy who didn't have to try very hard, who could just sort of do the most basic shit, whatever he felt like. He looked like he was having fun and being creative, and again, looked a lot more relaxed and mature than I have seen even in other fights where he's winning the whole time. So I thought,
yeah, I mean, it's a great sign to see, like, mentally.
Yeah,
he came off a really, really discouraging loss, and then he came in. He's a young fighter. You could, there was none of this like Jordan Mean kind of,
yeah,
oh no, I'm having a terrible time kind of stuff. He was having a blast, like, laughing at Simone when he checked his kicks. And yeah, and not a big change, but just like body work was really nice. I mean, I just like, it's just like, he's a nice fighter to watch.
Absolutely. And those are the kind of changes you would expect. I mean, we talked about how we're probably not going to see some kind of like great technical sophistication for as long as he's getting most of his training at Team Alpha Male. But these are just sort of the natural stages of evolution any talented fighter will go through. He is getting more experience, and this looked like a more experienced fighter. More relaxed, more flexible, more willing to try different things, to throw certain strikes away, to kind of test Ricky Simone, even though he was in a dominant position, rather than just trying to rip his head off the entire time. And it led to a stage where he was able to rip Ricky Simone's head off multiple times in a row with beautifully, like, subtle, quick, effortless combinations. So yeah, it was a much nicer building performance from Song Yadong, given the fact that he wasn't really tested that much throughout. And again, I didn't feel like Ricky Simone looked bad. I mean, he showed off a lot of great defensive reactions. His jab was quite effective when he stuck to it. He took a lot of shots without like being completely deterred. He just did not have the right approach. He still looked like a continually improving version of the Ricky Simone we've been seeing. He just didn't. He didn't know how to win the fight.
I mean, as I said, it just wasn't a fight where he was insulated in any way from what Song Yadong could do.
Yeah, and he didn't seem to realize
other people might be,
Right.
Chito Vera by the fact that he's immortal, huge, and Corey Sandhagen by the fact that he is
brilliant,
brilliant and huge.
Yeah, brilliant and huge, and also pretty immortally durable. I mean, at least very good.
At least
very good at recovering from getting hurt, which he did against Song Yadong.
But yeah, I mean, and Song Yadong called out Chito Vera.
Sure.
Afterwards for another fight, which goes to, again, it's one of those things where like encouraging, because you're like, man, this guy must really love to fight. So I don't think there's many people who have fought Chito Vera once and then just like, man, I'd like to fight that guy again. I
think he very clearly does.
It's just a good thing to see. Called out Chito Vera. Sean O'Malley, which I think would be a very interesting test of how far he can mature in terms of like, because being drawn on and sort of following someone around and bracing and so on, this is Sean O'Malley's bread and butter.
Potentially a very tricky matchup, but one with some obvious ways in for Song Yadong as well.
I mean, that would be a fascinating fight for him. He's. I'm glad to see Ricky Simone fall, but so like pleased to see Song Yadong is still like a real force in the division. Yeah,
and again, I just want to emphasize that I don't really see this as Simone being like completely derailed. Like,
no,
I think this is just a tough opponent for him. There are a lot of other matchups in the division that I would still very confidently pick him to win. I think it's very likely he will grow from this. And, Song versus Chito or Sean O'Malley, those both sound like phenomenal matchups to me. And I'm very excited to see if he can continue getting more comfortable and looking like a savvier, more experienced, more disciplined fighter, going forward. I loved it. Great fight. And, well, not to toot my own horn, but a pretty solid episode of Heavy Hands. Because that's it.
Weird when we've got like cool, relevant fights to talk about.
Yeah, that is funny, isn't it? We can come into an episode and be like, I don't know what to make of this. I don't know what we're going to say. And just have a good time figuring that out. As opposed to having to talk about a Blades Pavlovich style card every fucking week. So let's see what's coming up on the docket. UFC 288, of course. We will have a lot more to discuss that we didn't get to here after the fact. At least I hope. Oh, and thank God, the following card. Phil, have you seen it?
No.
Jairzinho Rosenstruik, main event.
Oh, shut up. Shut up. As soon as you started saying Jairzinho, I was like, shut your whole mouth.
Rosenstruik versus Jailton Almeida, but don't worry, the co-main event, Anthony Smith, Johnny Walker.
Oh my God. Small blessings. Small blessings. They could have done, still might do what they did last time with the with Song Yadong and Ricky Simone, and decide this one just has to be split up into two main events.
That's a main event. It has to be a main event. It's Anthony Smith. What are we doing? Put him in the co-main? What are we, crazy?
Fortunately, we've got Pennington versus Aldana 2.
Fuck you.
I'm not joking.
No, not you. Fuck the UFC. Fuck them. What the fuck? A Pennington Aldana main event? At the very least, this Rosenstruik Almeida card is like an actual fight night. It has D-Rod, Daniel Rodriguez. It's
actually a pretty good card apart from the main event. Which
Daniel Rodriguez.
Pray is Jailton Almeida instantly submitting Jairzinho Rosenstruik.
Oh, he's definitely going to out-wrestle Rosenstruik at least. I mean,
No, I don't want him out-wrestling. I want him to instantly submit him.
Yeah, okay. That'll be fun.
Like, I don't want to watch Rosenstruik.
But
I was going to finish that sentence, and I decided that was it. ...
And then one more dot. That's it. Daniel Rodriguez, Ian Gary is on that undercard. That is a very cool fight. There's a couple of like guys trying to regain their footing matchups that I like. Alex Morono, Tim Means, Cody Stamen, Douglas De Silva. There's some good stuff on this undercard. Even Matt Brown, Court McGee is kind of a cool old dude fight. That's like when you see, like an old rich guy in a surprisingly age appropriate marriage. You're like, wow, his wife is beautiful and very clearly rich, but she's only 10 years younger than him. That's how I feel about Matt Brown, Court McGee. Good for you guys.
Yeah, that is the kind of fight that both of them should be getting.
Yeah, It's not the MMA equivalent of like Sumner Redstone getting his pelvis pulverized by some 28-year-old supermodel. Have I taken this metaphor too far? Let the fans decide. Thank you, fans, for listening to another episode of Heavy Hands. Find us on Twitter at Evil Greg Jackson, at Boxing Bush, and check out the Patreon. We're going to have a couple more fights from this UFC 288 undercard, and maybe a smattering of whatever was interesting, if anything was, from the song Simone undercard. After this. No, not after this. It's the end of the show. You came here, find a points of face punching. You know the drill. It's Heavy Hands.